Now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Adler, who will be introducing our second keynote speaker of the day.
Thank you very much. I'm Victor Adler, and I'm a math teacher here at the Harker Upper School. Welcome to the Symposium. I first taught Evan Maynard honors pre-calculus when he was in 11th grade. It's a little emotional for me, I'm sorry, to have a guy come back. Throughout high school, he was heavily involved in sports, and he actually participated in 2 sports simultaneously in the fall season of his junior year, cross country and water polo. I've never heard of a student doing that feat since. And he is largely responsible for starting my coaching career at Harker, an event for which I'm forever indebted. I had the pleasure to coach him in water polo in his senior year, my first year of coaching. Evan was a good student in pre-calculus. He was curious and invested. He was, and I assume still is, a tinkerer. And it wasn't the math that made for our memorable conversations. It rarely is. What was memorable was his car. Shortly after he had received his driver's license, he started rebuilding a Datsun. Yes, Datsun. For those of you who are young, you don't know what a Datsun is because it is now Nissan. He had a 240 or a 260 or 280, I don't remember which. And at that time, I also had an interest in sports cars, so our conversations were about water polo and cars, and rarely about pre-calculus or calculus. After graduating from Harker, Evan went on to Case Western Reserve University, and his penchant for cars steered him toward a major in mechanical engineering with an emphasis on aerospace and business. He participated in the Formula Hybrid SAE competition. He and a team of students built a race car from scratch. He optimized the relationship between the gas engine and the electric motors. And this hands-on experience opened the door to internships from precision gauge development to military jet engine test support. After receiving his bachelor's at Case, Evan went to Purdue University to get his master's in aerospace engineering. There he worked at Purdue's rocket and gas turbine combustion lab as a research assistant, directly supporting the engine development efforts of new space companies. I wonder what it's like to give a test in a class like turbine engine studies, and a student misses an easy question. Do you say, that's okay? This is rocket science? Anyway, his master's thesis was titled Efficient Experimental Design and Development of Injector Mixing Theories for Performance Prediction. While Evan became interested in space in 8th grade when he learned about the concept of a space elevator, he hadn't given much thought to a career in space. But his career in rockets lifted off after Purdue when he landed a job with Blue Origin, the Jeff Bezos-backed company, which makes a single rocket that both launches and lands. He has had a constellation of opportunities at Blue Origin. He qualified a propulsion module software for first flight, completed preliminary design of the capsule life support system, and improved performance of the capsule's reaction control systems. In early 2016, he gave Harker a rare opportunity of putting experiments on a rocket and doing research in microgravity. With his career reaching high Earth orbit, he has become responsible for designing, developing, and analyzing several subscale and medium-scale pre-burner combustors. I always enjoy watching our alumni reach for the stars. And without further space puns, it is my pleasure to introduce Evan Maynard.
How's everyone doing? So, you know who I am. I work on reusable rockets at Blue Origin. And I want to talk to you today about the path Blue Origin uses to get all the way to space. Now, I think there are big goals going on in commercial space flight, and I think there are big goals going on in artificial intelligence. So that's how I'm going to try and tie it together here. And that's difficult to do. So the first thing we could talk about is Blue Origin's goals. Blue Origin is trying to achieve millions of people living and working in space. I don't really know how we're going to do that. Well, wait a second, I work there. This goal is so big and its timelines are so long that I don't really have the idea of where we're going right now. I know what we've done in the past, I know what we're doing today, and I know what we're doing tomorrow, but that still doesn't equal millions of people living and working in space. So how are we going to do that? Right now, there's 6 people living in space on the International Space Station. We've put 536 people in space since we started doing it in the 1960s. That's a heck of a long way from millions of people living and working in space. We need orders of magnitude more people in space, and that's going to take a lot of work. So the first thing when you talk about anything is people want to know how much it's cost. If I offer you an experience, you're going to ask me, well, how much is that going to cost me? So, and when people think about space, they think about a lot of expense. It's not a secret. So we're going to have to reduce the cost in order to put orders of magnitude more people living and working in space. So when you talk about rockets, a lot of people will think, okay, it's expensive, and this is a high-performing machine, and we're going to send it to space. And we only use it once, so in order to get the most bang for our buck, we're going to put a lot more payload on it. So what that means is we need increased performance. But I don't know very many things that when you talk about reducing costs that you think, well, the way to do that is to increase performance. To bring it back to cars, if you buy a car and you want a faster car, that's going to cost you more money. So this is a little bit funny to me. So that's the way people think. The other thing I said in that sentence was, we only use it once. But I don't know anybody that buys a car, drives it home, and then that's it. They always get in it the next day, they drive it somewhere else, and you use it over and over again, and you get a lot of use out of it. So if we can take rockets and we can use them again, then we will be able to reduce the cost. So we think about performance. Since 1960s to now, maybe we've had significant improvements in performance. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 50%. I don't have the numbers on me today. But that's not an order of magnitude, that's for certain. Now, if you think about reuse, so you use it once, okay? And if you can recover that, then you get to use it twice. Now, if you use it twice, you've got 50% reduction in cost. So in the last 50 years, we've got 50%, say. In one technology step, we get 50% reduction. Now, if you've developed the technology to reuse it once, who's to say that you can't keep using that technology over and over again? Who's to say you can't use it 10 times? There's the order of magnitude. Who's to say you can't use it 100 times? There's 2 orders of magnitude. We're well on our way. Now, that's still a big goal. If you told me, okay, go recover a booster, that's never been done before. So it's still too big of a goal, so I'm going to say we're going to reduce it even further in a couple steps. So small steps is an important way to achieve big goals. This is going to be important for artificial intelligence as you go and change humanity. You're going to need to take small steps. Take a step one direction, see how that feels. If it's right, great, take another. If it's not, take a step backward. That's okay too. Make sure you learn from whatever mistakes you make along the way. So Blue Origin has broken this down into 2 easy steps that you can use in your daily life to get to space. I'm going to make this really easy. First one, get to space. Everybody can do that. Step 2, you want to stay in space. You know, the idea is that if you keep falling and missing the Earth, you never come back down. So that's step 2, stay there. Step 1 for Blue Origin is a program called New Shepard. And this is suborbital spaceflight. So like I said, there's 2 ways to get to space. The first, space is defined as an altitude. Altitude of space is 62 miles, 100 kilometers, 327,000 feet. As an engineer, I deal in every unit system possible. And step 1 of that is getting the altitude. So once you achieve altitude, you're in space. But you're not going to stay there, because in order to stay in space, you need to have horizontal velocity. So every rocket typically refers to its performance in terms of speed. But then colloquially, we always talk about launching things up. But that's not really how it needs to work. So if you go fast, horizontally fast enough, you'll end up falling. Okay, that's okay, but you keep missing the Earth all the way around. You're throwing yourself at the Earth, but you just keep missing. You can do this for as long as you want, because up in space there's nothing slowing you down. You come down eventually after a couple of years, but depending on where you are. But that's the idea. New Shepard is a program that goes up just like Apollo. It comes up. You put a capsule on top of a booster, just like Alan Shepard did in 1960, the first American to reach space. He reached the altitude, so we name our booster after him. The booster goes all the way up to space, reaches 200,000 feet, separates, and it continues and coasts up until it goes over the von Karman line at 62 miles. At that point, the booster and the capsule are about a couple hundred feet apart as they come back down. And the capsule's going to come down with the passengers in it, and come back onto parachutes. Parachutes are very safe. They rarely go wrong. We use them a lot. The booster, on the other hand, is going to do something a little bit different. It's going to come down and deploy stabilizing fins at the top because the vehicle has to fly in both directions. So when we change the direction of flight, we have to change the aerodynamics a little bit. It's going to deploy drag brakes, slow the vehicle down. It's going to restart its engine, and that engine's going to slow it the rest of the way. Deploy the landing gear, come back to the pad, good to go again. It's important when you take steps that you take significant steps. We're not breaking this down into something that's been achieved every time. So we're not designing cars, because cars rarely fail to achieve their main objective of driving down the road. Maybe they fail other reasons. We're also going to put humans on it. So we're going to take significant steps along the path that we want to be along, eventually flying humans, but we don't necessarily want to take easy steps. So break the problem down a little bit, but not too much, and that's the idea. So step one is this program. So been a little bit simplistic. We take a lot more steps than two. So this is our first vehicle back in 2005. It's a vehicle we called Karen. And this is one of the first things Blue Origin ever flew. We flew this in 2005, and we bought 4 jet engines off the shelf. We build rocket engines, not necessarily jet engines. So we went and bought these off the shelf, put them on a frame, and we flew this vehicle to prove to ourselves that we could build a vehicle, that we could fly it, and that we could control it. Now, this may not sound that impressive. We've been flying vehicles for a long time, hovering them. Helicopters been around for a long time. But to Blue Origin, this is a big step. First vehicle we built, first vehicle we flew, first vehicle we operated, first vehicle we controlled. It's a good step. But it's not our end goal, and it's not really on the path. There's a kind of a build our own confidence. So step 2, we go to a vehicle we call Goddard. Now the engineers, we call these PMs, propulsion modules, and this is PM1. We take this and we fly this in 2006. We add rocket engines to this. We're doing the similar thing that we did with Karen, but this time we have rocket engines on it. Rocket engines don't like to throttle. That's a big step, and they're finicky. They like to be on or off, and they do things quickly. So we add this to the vehicle. We do the same thing. We add 9 engines, each producing 2,000 pounds of thrust, and we fly this in 2006 for 3 flights. On each of these vehicles we build, I'll put the number of engines, the total vehicle power, and what we're doing with it so you can see the progression in steps. After we finish this vehicle in 2006, we move on to the next step, which is a vehicle PM2. You can see how this goes. 1 follows 2, 2 follows 1. And we send this vehicle, we increase complexity because the first vehicle only used 1 propellant in the rocket engine. Rocket engines, the majority of them use 2 propellants. So we add a propellant that buys us significant amounts of energy. So now we move from 2,000 pounds thrust to 30,000 pounds thrust. Reduce the number of engines, but it's still multi-engine, so it's still complex. It gives us a total power of 160,000 pounds of thrust. This is just a force, like same thing on a scale. That's what you would read on the scale if you put it on top. When we go to fly this vehicle, we're going through the transonic regime and we lose control of it. And we develop an in-flight instability. So computers decide to shut the vehicle down and let it crash. It says, you're off course, you need to stop. It took us 5 years to go from step 1 to step 2. So this is a big loss to the team. But failure is really good too because it enables you to do a couple of things. The first of which, it allows you to start over. And B, it teaches you everything that you didn't know very quickly. So we look at this and we look at everything that failed in it, and we look at what we have with the architecture, and we realize that we want to go a little bit different direction, right? So we're going to switch from hydrogen peroxide and a propellant called RP1, which is a type of kerosene, and we switch to hydrogen and liquid oxygen. We add some simplicity to that vehicle, but like I said, we're changing propellant, so it's going to take us a little bit to develop it. So in the meantime, we actually test some of the safety systems for the crew. The crew safety is very important to Blue Origin. One thing people always want to know about cost, and they want to know if it's safe, right? Nobody wants to do anything that's going to endanger their life, and so we need to increase the safety at the same time. So this is an opportunity for us to test a safety system for the capsule. The capsule has a solid rocket motor in it. It's an emergency escape motor, and that will take off in the event that the booster has a problem, just like what just happened to us in 2011. In that case, the capsule would have escaped and saved the crew. So we want to prove that we can do this throughout the entire flight. So the first step is we do that from the pad, partially because we don't have a booster, so it's what we can do, partially because we need to demonstrate it. 70,000 pounds thrust, this motor will burn out in 2 to 3 seconds, and it will take the capsule away from the booster and whatever is going on there that it decided to need to leave. Perfectly successful, deploys the parachutes, and this is difficult because on the ground, when you're near the ground, parachutes take a little bit of time to operate, so we need to make sure we get high enough that the parachutes can bring it back down. Perfectly successful 2012. We finally finished the new booster with hydrogen, and we're ready to fly it in April of 2015. We've simplified this vehicle a little bit. We've gone down to one engine again, which actually we've never done before at this point. And in 2015, we fly at 110,000 pounds thrust. Because hydrogen is a little bit more efficient, we can reduce the power required to get all the way up. That's okay. Like I said, the booster has to get to space, and once it gets to space, most boosters are done, right? If you deliver the payload at a good velocity and altitude, the booster's been 100% successful. We drop it off and let it crash land. That's okay. The capsule deploys its parachutes, delivers the crew, simulated crew. We don't have crew on it yet, to Earth. Great day. But at Blue Origin, trying to reuse these vehicles, so the booster is actually supposed to come back to the pad and land. But along the way, as it's coming down and supposed to deploy all these systems, us watching it, we start to notice that these systems aren't deploying at the right times. And maybe they're not deploying all the way. Normally in rockets, when it goes wrong very fast, pretty much before you realize it's gone wrong, and it's very obvious. But in this case, we're watching a slow death over a couple minutes, and this is heart-wrenching. It comes in at significantly higher velocity than we intended. It still has fuel on board in order to land, so it creates quite a show. Anybody that works in the rocket business always appreciates a good explosion, even when it's your hardware that you've built for years and years and years. It takes a little bit of time to build up that comedic effect, but it does happen. We learned our lesson of when you lose a vehicle, it takes a long time to build these things, and maybe we don't want to lose them very often. So at this time, we were building more than one at once. So this is a gamble in that we like this architecture. We thought it would work. And so we were building more than once. We were ready to fly the next vehicle in November of 2015. Here's the video that resulted. This happens in West Texas at our launch site there. We roll the vehicle out of the barn in the morning, out to the pad on a trailer. It's about 70 feet long, about the size of a school bus. We tilt it up on a hydraulic lift. As we do that, when we get it set up, we actually actuate all the systems in the beginning, just like an airplane would. You'll see that in a minute. Make sure everything's functional before we actually give the command to lift off. At this point, you float for 4 minutes, and we give passengers the ability to unbolt. At this point, we didn't have windows or video up there. This is what you'll be doing. We fly the largest windows in space. These windows are much bigger than you find in most aircraft, commercial aircraft. We ask you to restrap in, and you'll re-enter and deploy your parachutes, come back to land. This is an exciting ride. 3 Gs on the way up, 5 Gs on the way down, about the of a roller coaster. Anybody want to ride? If you're not sold yet, you'll be sold eventually. So this is the first time this has ever been done, right? That's important to realize. So things have been reused in spaceflight before, but never the whole thing all at once, and never has it landed vertically back on the pad where it started at this point in time in 2015. So we're really happy about this. We've been working on this for 10 years, and I don't know if I have a good way of conveying exactly how happy we were when we did this. So I'll do you one better. I'll show you. So this is a video of us watching this flight. Now, you'll see two videos of the officers in Kent looking at this. So we're watching a screen, a telephoto lens of the vehicle, and that's shown on the bottom left. The bottom right is actually what's happening, but there are times when we actually can't see very well because it kicks up dust. And so we're really relying on the controller to read out what's happening, and we know what all these events are. So sometimes you can see that it's landed and we haven't reacted yet, and that's because we can't actually see what's going on. Decidedly uncool. It's okay. We're really excited. People ask me why this hasn't been done before, and there's one technology that we really rely on a lot, and that's our deep throttling Beat 3 engine. You remember at the beginning I said most rocket engines don't actually throttle? So through the Apollo era, those engines, 100% devices all the way up. First engine that can throttle with any significant margin is the Space Shuttle main engine, developed in the 1970s and flown through the early 2000s. That throttles down to 70%, super useful there. The BE-3 engine throttles down to under 20% of its throttle range. What that allows us to do is allows us to bring it back to the pad and park it when the vehicle is not weighing that much. Rocket engines are kind of like this. You're going to go park your car in the garage. But you only have two options. You can either have it floored, and this isn't your sedan, this is a Ferrari or a Porsche or whatever you want to be driving. And then the only thing you get to do is you get to open the garage from 100 kilometers away, and you get to turn off your engine. Yeah, you're not going to park it in your garage. If you can restart your engine, now you have a chance. But that's what we can do. So the BE-3 can also restart in addition to throttling. A lot of engines can restart, but they're typically not booster engines. They're engines that operate in space. So these are the unique things of the BE-3. It's a technology we're really proud of. It's what enables us to do this. Blue Origin doesn't stop there. We take the vehicle, and from day one, we designed it for reuse. So we went out, brought it back to that garage, and we took a look around it and said, you know, it looks exactly like we expected. So we'll fly it again. 2 months later, we put it back out on the pad, and we fly it again. This demonstrates reuse of the booster. 50% reduction in cost, right there. That all works well. Okay, we can do this as many times as we want. How often do you want us to do it? But we're not done yet. We want to put humans on it. We don't just want to prove reuse. So there's a lot of more work we need to do in order to bring reuse. So flight 3, we actually take the engine and we start it a little bit later, right? So it was already pretty close to the ground. You heard the guy say 12,000 feet, and we're falling at multiple thousands of feet per second before we restart the engine. Well, we increase the pucker factor. Hold on to your seats. We restart even lower. Flight 4, we actually demonstrate some of the fault tolerance capability of the capsule where the passengers are. We intentionally fail one of the 3 parachutes. That all goes perfectly. Our last flight, you remember we lost a vehicle in transonic. That's one of the difficult flight regimes. And then we also proved that we could do it from the pad. So now we're going to do an in-flight escape test, that same test we did from the pad, but from the top of the booster during flight. That engine produces 70,000 pounds of thrust, and it lights while it's still on top of the booster. So you're going to hit the top of the booster with 70,000 pound thrust hammer. So from one end, you're putting 110,000 pounds thrust from the engine. On the other end, you're going to hit it with 70,000 pound thrust hammer. That thing's not going to survive. No way. Well, maybe there's a chance. So we tell it to go to space anyways. We fly 46 seconds into flight. We artificially trigger the escape system. The crew capsule gets away from the booster perfectly, deploys the parachutes. We control that through the transonic regime, bring the passengers back. No problem. The booster takes a look at the capsule. What, you don't want to go to space today? And it keeps going, goes all the way to space. Gets up there, has a look around, says, I've been here 5 times this year, and comes back and lands back on the pad. Takes a look at us and says, what, like you doubted me? From there, we said, fine, booster, you win, you can retire. We're taking that vehicle around the United States for 2 years and the world for the same amount of time, and then we're going to put it in a museum as yet to be determined. So if it comes near you, I'd highly recommend taking a look. You can see that it hasn't been through an easy life. When you get up to it, you'll see there's a lot of damage and surface things wrong with it. That's okay. We can design for that. We're going to fix that on the next iteration. So the next step for New Shepard is to continue adding capability, make sure we understand it before we put humans on board, because, like we said, we take safety very seriously, and we want to make sure it comes back. We're building 2 more vehicles at this time. We'll fly more later this year, and hoping to fly humans next year. We're not going to stop there, because I said we want to stay in space, just because it's that easy, and this is the next vehicle we're working on. This is our orbital class vehicle. And we've done a lot of work to the point that we have this pretty picture for you. It's got a lot of similar systems that we have on New Shepard. Again, we're just taking the steps again, but it's always along the same path that we want. So that's good. And then we're going to increase the power. So I got another thing. I got one better than a picture. I've got a video. Now this one's a simulation, but it proves we have a lot of work done. Let me point something out. We're going to put 7 engines on this vehicle. And each of those engines produces 550,000 pounds of thrust. So each engine is 5 times the size of New Shepard's engine. So so that gives you a total of 3.8 million pounds of thrust. I don't quite know how to represent this in terms of more than a number, right? But New Shepard has 0.1 million pounds of thrust. So that's the relative scale of what we're doing here. We use a lot of the same elements that we use on New Shepard. So roll it out in the morning, or whatever time is required, tilt it up, actuate the systems. You see a lot of the same systems, landing gear, fins, and then we're going to launch it. Now the first stage is going to provide most of the altitude and some of the horizontal velocity, but not all of it. And the second stage will provide most of the horizontal velocity. This lifts out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. And on the East Coast, when you lift off and you go east, and if you have any horizontal velocity, your downrange is in the ocean. Stage separation. Second stage goes on. First stage flips around, relights the engine, and because it's going to land in the ocean, well, there's nothing in the ocean to land on. Well, we put a barge out there, or a ship, just for this purpose. And we land the booster on a ship. Take that ship back to port, fuel it up, fly it again. Second stage goes on, finishes, deploys the payload, in this case a satellite. Blue Origin focuses on humans, but we're happy to fly anything you want. You want to fly some cargo? Happy to do that for you. Just so you can look at it as a picture here, this is exactly what's happening again. And this, we're hoping to fly this in 2020. This vehicle puts up 100,000 pounds into orbit. 5 fully loaded semi-trucks all at once. This will be one of the biggest vehicles flying by the time it flies in 2020. There are some bigger vehicles planned by NASA and some competitors, but it will certainly be large. Because it's all the same technologies we develop on New Shepard, we feel confident taking that big step. We're not going to go with a small orbital vehicle. We're just going to take the next step because along the path. We take steps, but they take big steps, and our motto is gradatum ferociter, step by step ferociously, as the labs students here will know. Here's all of our vehicles all set up next to each other. So you can take a look. We started with BE1, 2,000 pounds thrust. We end at BE4, 550,000 pounds thrust. We got there via 4 vehicles. Since 2005, we've been flying, and we're still flying today. So switch gears a little bit here. I'll go into, Dr. Adler covered a lot of my career, but maybe add a little bit more details for you. Again, using the same step-by-step approach. When I left Harker, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an engineer, maybe do business, but I didn't know how I was going to do that or what I was going to work in. I certainly didn't know I was going to be working at Blue Origin. I didn't know that until halfway through my graduate studies and worked there. But just kind of followed what I was interested at the time, did some exploring, sometimes a step backwards, see how this goes. So step 1, I went, and I was interested in cars, so I went and found a team where I could go build cars. Go try it. When you do something in school, you solve that problem for maybe 10 minutes in a test condition. Homework, maybe you work for half an hour on a problem. I can tell you at my office, I work at a problem for maybe minimum of an hour, 4 hours, but most problems on the order of a couple of weeks. So this helps to get your hands dirty, and a professor can tell you problems, teach you the physics, but can't tell you the things you're going to encounter, and that's really where you experience a lot of new things. Like, the other thing I learned from this is that when engineering projects run out of money, that's it, game over. So after a year and a half of this, that was the end of the car project because we ran out of money. So I had to go find something else to do with my time. So I went to a company called Timken, and I was there developing gauging techniques for bearings. Now, it was a technically difficult problem, and there was a lot of work to be done there, but it didn't inspire me to do what I wanted to do. So I moved on from there. I didn't really feel inspired by that company. But it gave me a lot of experience, and that opened a lot of doors for me. So again, another step that I took, and turns out that wasn't quite right, is take a step back. Next opportunity I was at Pratt Whitney testing military jet engines in Florida. My first taste of aerospace, first taste of testing, first taste of machines so powerful I can't begin to describe how powerful they are. And from there, I went to Purdue. So Purdue gives you the opportunity also to build things. That's really, I think, the way you do things. I think that's what Harker does great, especially with this research symposium, is giving students the early opportunity to work in an active environment, right? You're actually there trying things. So I've got 2 videos here for you that help explain what's going on as I work in propulsion. The first thing shows you exactly how fast things happen in a rocket engine, and one reason why this is so difficult. I really dislike videos like this because they scare me. I would rather just know the numbers rather than actually visualize the numbers. What you'll see here is a slow motion video of one propellant dropping into another. These propellants are special in that they react spontaneously. They don't need an ignition source. They provide their own ignition source. They're called hypergolic propellants. And so you'll see a yellow drop into a pool of white liquid there at the bottom, all shown next to a person blinking. And this is everything shown in the same slow motion camera. Did he blink? Yeah, that looks like an explosion. I can tell you that it's not. By a technical definition, that's just burning. There's a technical reason for why that's true, but really, we try and control burning. This will play one more time. There you have it. So that's what's happening inside these combustors continuously. It's not a one-drop type deal. There's millions of drops all reacting at the same time. And if you get one to react in the wrong place, you lose your engine. So the other thing that Purdue does is we test rocket engines both for commercial companies and for research. I supported both of these things, but this is the best video coming from the lab. This is one engine I supported. This is about a couple thousand pounds of thrust, so for scale. You can see, let's see, right there in the corner, that's a man door, right? And in rocket engines, we only need a couple seconds of test, especially in the research community, to get the data that we need. You'll see a couple different angles of this, all one test. Some of them are in slow motion. This is several months of work, but everything you see in this video, everything you see in the lab, that's built by a student. There's no professional engineers at this lab. Well, there's 2 that make sure that we do things safely. But for the majority of the work is done by students, and that's really important. Here's slow motion side angle shot. Over the course of my time at Purdue, I performed a couple hundred of these tests, usually smaller scale than this one. After a year and a half of testing, I had my first failure on stand. I can tell you that I learned as much from that one failure as I learned from the couple hundred tests that I'd done up until that time. Failure is important, teaches you a lot of things. Just try not to do it too often because it gets draining if that happens too. So at Blue Origin, I'm a propulsion engineer. So I work on engines, and this is the BE-4 engine that powers New Glenn. This is what I work on. Let's see, this is a guy right here. That gives you a sense of scale. We're going to put 7 of these things on there. We talk about cars again. You know, the cars that you drive around day to day, maybe you have a couple hundred horsepower, 100, 200 horsepower. Just the pump of this engine produces 70,000 horsepower. Now we have 7 of them, so the entire New Glenn vehicle on the base is running 490,000 horsepower. That doesn't even take into account what happens after we burn all the rest of the propellant in the engine. I don't know that number. Sorry. My job is, I'm a development test engineer, so I take the designer's intent, and then the test engineers run the tests on the stand. A lot of what, like I was doing at Purdue, I was running those tests, and I live between those 2 people. I live for the data, and I try and take that data and make sure it's doing designer's intent. It never is. And then I try and fix it, right? Or I help the designer fix it, or I design a new test to prove that what we need to fix or how we're going to fix it. So that's my day-to-day. The other thing that I do is sometimes we create smaller test engines, and that's my job. I do the design for that. So I take the big engine, I say how we can make this smaller, what do we need to scale, what makes it appropriate, and I build that, test it, operate it, build it, fix it. I've got one of those tests here. So at Blue, sometimes this test we'll see runs 3 different throttle points. So the one that runs at Purdue, we ran 1 test. We get 3 tests in one here. It's about 20 seconds long, but this is a shortened version of it. This will loop continuously, so don't let that throw you off. Uh-oh. So you'll see throttle 1, throttle 2, throttle 3. There's throttle 3. And we ran 550 engine tests in 2015 at Blue Origin. Among 2 engine programs. So that's 275 engine tests per program. So I work on BE-4. So that's more than 1 engine test per day because there's only 200 work days in a year, roughly, 250. That keeps me very busy. These tests take a long time to run. They're very powerful, and we don't like to mess up the stand. So I spend time, I show up, I look at data from the last test, I program the test stand, and then I support test. If we lose sensors, I say, hey, that sensor we don't need this time, or no, we need to replace that sensor before we test, and then we produce cool videos like this. Because this is a research symposium, I want to tell you about research opportunities that you can do with us at Blue Origin. So our suborbital vehicle flies humans, but it also does research, and it provides some of the cleanest microgravity research you can get without getting to orbit. So you get 4 minutes of microgravity, and a lot of experimentals will tell you that's a really long time. If you give me 1 second of test data, usually I'm pretty happy, and I'll operate within that regime. 4 minutes is a long time for you to do what you need to do. You'll have access to it a couple hours before and a couple hours after the flight. We help provide some of the data collection systems. And this is open to do what you want. This is more affordable than you might think, and I highly encourage you to reach out to our payload specialist at Blue Origin if you come up with something you think you want to do. This is open to both students, engineers, adults, parents, whatever your title is, you want to do something on our rocket, come talk to us. And we'd love to have you. This is some of the different test stands I work on. So this is the smallest one we run. This is a medium scale test stand, and this is the very next one we're going to run. We shipped this engine out a couple weeks ago down to Texas to do our testing. And with that, I will take questions.
Great. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and read out some questions that the audience had submitted through Slido. Our most upvoted question was, what interested you in working in space technology and inspired you to work for Blue Origins with all of your sports in school that you had going on?
I think I was really inspired by the vision. That's really what it is. I want to make an impact in the world, and combustion engines in cars, that's a dead-end technology because electric cars are definitely a better solution. So I liked working with powerful machines. I was really inspired by the work at Pratt Whitney, but that's a large company, a large government contractor. I wanted to have bigger impact than that, so I was looking for a small company. And the vision there is key. Pratt Whitney wants to provide the best jet engines to the military, and the military does what they want with them. Blue Origin sells the whole package. So we design everything in-house. There's a lot of responsibility on the engineer. There's quick decision-making power. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a meaningful impact if all things said and done. Right? We're trying to build the infrastructure to allow you to experiment in space. So if we can reduce the cost enough, entrepreneurs will go to space and start trying things. And then we'll have, hopefully, the .com style innovation in space. And so that's what I want to encourage, and that's the vision. So.
Awesome, thanks. The next question is, how did you first start working at Blue Origin?
While I was at Purdue, I was working as a test engineer, primarily, at the lab for a new space company. And that hands-on experience, as well as the thesis that I wrote, attracted attention. And so I had the whole package. I could do things with my hands. I had the scientific ability, I think, and the critical thinking mind. And then that's how I got to Blue Origin.
How did all of the resources at Harker lead you to finding and pursuing your passion for space technology?
I think Harker does a fantastic job of encouraging you to try a lot of things and to look around in college. I mean, like I said, I wasn't into space really at Harker, but Harker laid the groundwork. It really taught me work ethic, and none of these things are easy. I think they all come from hard work, though. I don't think I have particular special talents. I think it comes from hard work, and Harker does a great job of teaching you that. Time management's super important. Both in my office, I have a lot of tasks, a lot of things pulling me different ways. And being able to prioritize tasks and manage my time is a really important skill that I trace all the way back to Harker.
What made you turn from cars to technology?
I think I wanted to make sure that I had the impact, right? I felt that cars were going to be a dead end, and there was only minuscule improvements that I would have be given the opportunity to make. There's no such thing as a small car company. And so I was looking, but there are somehow small space companies still. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's really what led me down that path.
About when do you think humans will be able to take recreational day trips on this vehicle to space with low cost?
So we're trying to fly passengers in 2018 for the first time, commercial passengers.
What's your favorite part about working at Blue Origin?
The ability to make quick decisions, and that I own the whole product. So I don't just look at data. I do design. I do my own structural analysis. That's all key. Being able to make your own decisions and to make decisions quickly is really important without a lot of oversight. That's super empowering, and it's exciting. When you can make a decision and then move forward with it, and then not have to get 16 approvals and take 2 weeks to do that, that speed of decision-making process is super rewarding.
What do you think about the recent discovery of the exoplanet TRAPPIST-1?
That's awesome. I hope that we find a way to get there. We all know it's a long ways away. But that's really exciting, and that's what we're trying to encourage, right? We just recently started finding these things and having the time to look at them, but if you can imagine that anybody can build a satellite and afford to put it up, and it's not just NASA, then imagine what else we can find. We've only been looking for 40 years, and NASA's struggling for funding for all these programs. If anybody can go out there and look for whatever they want to look for, or they want to go put a lander on Mars and see exactly what's there, right? That's what's going to be really exciting. When people can start making all those discoveries themselves, I think we're just starting to find things. And and you can tell that these announcements of things that we're finding are coming sooner and sooner, right? We're announcing water on different planets. There's recently just water found on or hot thermal vents found on a moon going around, I think, Pluto or Jupiter, maybe. And so these types of discoveries will come more and more often, so super exciting.
What do you think about the recent reflight and relanding of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket?
That's awesome. Congrats to SpaceX. We're all in it to do the same thing. SpaceX is going to provide competition for us. We're going to provide competition for SpaceX, and we all know that competition brings down costs. So the more people that are successful, these new space companies are all brand new. We're all at risk of failure, and we're all at risk of people thinking that we can't do it. The accomplishments of Blue Origin reflect on SpaceX. The accomplishments of SpaceX reflect on us because it's the same industry. It's a favorite thing people do. And so the more successes we can all have, the better off we will all be.
Great. And our last question, when do you think the first Martian will land on Mars, or how far is current technology from doing so?
Oh, conjecture is a tricky beast. I think we'll have humans on Mars by 2030. Obviously, a lot of things can go wrong to prevent that. Maybe we'll have a lot of humans out there by then. I'm always probably wrong, but I'm happy to continue to work towards that. If we're out of questions on the system, we can just take the manual ones here too, if you have ones that came up that weren't so popular. Yeah.
How much will it cost to go up in space?
So the question was, how much will it cost to go up in space? Blue Origin is currently not selling tickets yet. But we're not the only person. Other people are trying to do this, and other people are selling tickets. We're not selling tickets. We want to make sure we know the system pretty well before we sell a ticket. The market price currently for other competitors is around $300,000 for a ride. Yes.
If you were to put like a probe on Mars, when can you put humans on Mars?
So I think the question was, if we can put a probe on Mars, when can we put humans on Mars? We can put probes on Mars currently. We do put rovers and things there. I think we'll put people on Mars around 2030, pending a lot of other successes. Yes? Great question. So Blue Origin is funded by Jeff Bezos, who's the owner of Amazon. Blue Origin is located in Kent, Washington. That's about 20 miles south of downtown Seattle. Our other facility is in El Paso, it's in Van Horn, Texas. We call it our West Texas launch site. It's about 2 hours east of El Paso, in the middle of nowhere. Our other launch facility is in Florida that we're building up now for our orbital launch vehicle. So all of our sites have engine test capability. In Kent, we test up to about 35,000 pounds if we want. In Florida, we can test up to 550,000 pounds of thrust. And in West Texas, we can test up to 1.5 million pounds of thrust. So that's the same size as an F1 engine. A question right here in front?
Why do investors hear about this industry that there's money being made here?
So that's kind of the great thing of, like, when the internet came out, you didn't think you could make money on it. But now everybody knows you can make money there. So the same idea is in space. There's a lot of industries that we haven't maybe discovered yet, and so that's our purpose, right? Internet companies were successful for a couple reasons, especially Amazon, and Jeff will talk about this, but he says, I was successful for a couple reasons, and one was because there were existing infrastructure. I could ship anything in the world for any way that I wanted, and I could accept money over the internet via credit card transactions, and those support infrastructure existed. Right now, there's no support infrastructure in order to get to space, right? So our goal is to develop that infrastructure so that other people can leverage technology like that, similar to how Jeff was able to leverage existing technology. So we're not here to predict exactly what industry will be the most successful in space, but we're here to lower the cost to the point that you can afford to try it. Currently, it's so expensive you won't try it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on space law in general, and how important do you think it is for the industry as a whole?
Space law?
Yeah.
That's really interesting too. That's something that we're just beginning to scratch the surface of, and space companies, commercial space companies are really opening that door wide open forcefully, and people are trying to keep it closed. Right now, the space law works like this. The FAA regulates our activities to people we will hurt that are not involved in our activities, so non-space flight participants. But they can't regulate our passengers. So the idea being that currently nobody knows what appropriate level of regulation is for our industry, and so they're going to allow us to work on things for a while and let us self-regulate until they kind of watch what we've done and see how it works. there's a catch to that in that the FAA gets to come in when we make a mistake. So the minute that we make a mistake, that opens the door for the FAA. And so that's really important too. We're highly motivated to do it to not make mistakes, right? It's in our self-interest to keep people safe, because no one's going to want to do it if people are not safe, and then no one's going to fund us, and that's going to kill the business. So the idea is to keep people safe is in our self-interest. When we get to space, that's also opening things like, what are the rules about the moon, right? What happens if you go to the moon? Are you allowed to take stuff from the moon? People haven't really figured or laid that out. So as we push the boundaries, regulations trying to keep up with us just in front of the bow wave of what we're trying to do. FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration. It's the governing body for airplanes. Yes, good question. This is a picture of just launch systems in the world to give you some scale to how New Glenn fits into that. This is all to scale. New Shepard isn't on here because you basically wouldn't see it. So we've got some Russian vehicles. We actually provide BE-4 engines to other commercial launch providers, namely called United Launch Alliance. And so they're one of the most successful launch companies in the world. They've flown over 100 times in a row without a failure. And they've chosen to use our engines for their next vehicle, and we're very proud of that. So they teach us a lot, and we provide them a great product for a low cost. The other thing is that for New Glenn, we decided to switch propellants. So this vehicle is a liquid natural gas powered vehicle. So the same stuff that comes out of your gas burning stove at home, powers your water heater, powers your furnace. The reason for that is it's a cheaper propellant. Now I said that propellants aren't necessarily the driving cost of a rocket, it's mostly the hardware. But that's not going to say we're not going to choose cheap propellants along the way. No vehicles have ever been designed with liquid natural gas, but now there are 3 companies talking about building vehicles with this propellant. And there have been some research done, like most of the research done at Purdue is with methane right now. Liquid natural gas's primary constituent is methane at 98% or so. So you can think of it as methane. Liquid natural gas is the cheapest form of that methane because it has some impurities in it. Yeah.
I'm just curious about what kind of a student you were in high school and middle school. Were you a real math geek, or like what were you enthusiastic about?
Yeah, I certainly enjoyed math and science. That's definitely sure. Definitely sure. Senora Moss will tell you that I was a Spanish student too, and that was probably my hardest class. I don't use Spanish anymore, but I do go to Spanish. I just got back from Guatemala, so I do dust those skills off. But I think, yeah, the sciences and things. I was always interested in how things work primarily, and that's not really a class that you get in high school. But luckily, my dad was able to explain how a lot of things worked, and that's where that kind of came from. I think it's important to try things, whatever you're interested in. Go try it. You don't have to be an expert in it. See how you like it. Yeah. Yes. NASA definitely teaches us things, so we benefit from a lot of NASA's knowledge. We don't work with NASA as much as other companies do, but we do have phone numbers, and they do help us out with some technology transfer. They've learned a lot in their 50 years of doing things, and they're always happy to help us out. Yeah. In the back?
Is there an open source ecosystem for Blue Origin in general for the space activity?
Say an open source.
Open source ecosystem for the Blue Origin or any of the space activity?
Open source with respect?
To contribute to the open source community in terms of what you're doing?
No. We're actually not allowed to contribute to the open source community by the federal government. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. Can we get a mic, or I can't?
So what's the most important sport you got in family when you want to pursue your career?
The sport?
The support.
Support. Oh, support. I think, you're asking me to pick favorites in front of a lot of people. I don't think I'm gonna do that. I think the whole everybody's important, right? Like teachers play a certain role, my coaches played a certain role, my parents, you know, a different role throughout because they're very continuous. I think everybody has a role. Yeah, even my brother helped me with this speech, something I probably wasn't expecting. He came in and he's like, let me help you out. Yep.
So who are going to be the first people on board one of your rockets?
We're gonna fly internal passengers first, and we haven't even started talking about who those people are, to my knowledge. And then once we've flown our own passengers and we understand what the experience is like, what the problems are, and how that works, then we'll transition to selling tickets and external passengers. But I don't think we've thought about that so much.
For the sake of time, I'll have to do the last question. So thank you again to Mr. Evan Maynard for coming and speaking today.